Talk with Connor OGara, national columnist from Saturday Down South. I'm laughing a little bit here at your new award that you've written about, Connor, because I thought every football award had to have some like old school player attached to it. You know, Maxwell. We've got you got the Heisman, of course. I mean, take your pick. It's always attached to somebody that played the game years and years and years ago. So why would you create an inaugural Football Player of the Year award and not at least call it the OGara?
You know, as you say that makes me feel like an opportunity was missed, Phil, and I need to maybe go back into the drafts and edit that one in. Look, the word of the week is narcissist, and I didn't want to come off as that. So, look, we're trying to be humble here because that's what an FBP is, football player, right? This is this concept that we saw last year with Keaton Thompson kind of played out, the Virginia star, the former Mississippi State quarterback, who had this season wearing number 99, in which he was listed on the depth chart as football player. I have already pitched the idea to Shane Beamer to put DK Joyner and Jaheim Bell on the depth chart listed as football player because it's for these guys who are positionless. And I know that we come up with the Paul Hornung Award as the most versatile player in college football. That award is not about that. It's not about the most versatile player. It's play receiver, play running back, and then maybe you also return kicks. To me, like those skill sets are pretty synonymous with one another. Mm-hmm. It's totally different to throw Keaton Thompson out there and say, hey, we're going to line you up in the backfield and you can throw a pass for us, you can catch a pass out of the backfield, or you can carry the ball as a running back and do all those different things. So to me, I feel like this award was needed. There's a lot. It's not just an offensive side of the ball thing as well. Antonio Johnson, the great defensive player on Texas A&M, is also a guy who needs to be listed for this. And then I went to the depths of East Carolina to list Jeremy Lewis, a guy who plays in coverage a lot as an outside linebacker. So I just think that a new award was needed. And if this gets momentum, I'll be very excited, and I will definitely not put my last name in the middle of it.
Well, Connor, we always see the word athlete during recruiting talk about somebody that they're not sure where they're going to play, and they just know this kid's an amazing athlete. In baseball, the word is utility player. Nobody ever calls anyone a utility player in football. I guess that's not a term they want to use. You always have to have a position attached to you when really what you're talking about are guys that can do multiple things. And you got Malik Hornsby on this list here, and we expect to see Malik Hornsby do a lot offensively for this team.
So think about this, guys. And I know, look, if we're just looking at snap count last year, not really favorable for Malik Hornsby to be even on the watch list for the FBP of the year. 80 snaps at quarterback, 1 at slot receiver. All right, that's not really doing a whole lot to help your case for FBP. But think about this. There is a world in which his role expands to the level where we could see him in the course of a game throwing multiple passes, catching multiple passes, and carrying the ball as essentially, more like a wildcat quarterback. That's what he has kind of been in that role more so, and what they could be using him if they bring him in late in some of these games, which I've advocated for that throughout the offseason and what I'd like to see his role develop into. I think that you're talking about somebody who fits that description of just unbelievable athlete that they want to be able to get on the field. KJ Jefferson said earlier in the offseason, they call him Tyreek Hill. Like he's got speed. Everybody knows that, who has watched him take a snap at Arkansas. And now the task for Kendall Briles is being able to figure out these different ways to get him involved in the offense. List him as football player on your depth chart. Watch him do a bunch of different things for you. Watch him make plays in the open field and use that speed, get the ball in his hands in a variety of ways, even if that means running the jet sweeps for him. You get the end arounds going, whatever that may be. I think Arkansas fans want to see Malik Hornsby develop into a legitimate FBP of the year candidate.
Do you think you see some of this stuff, incredibly early, like first drive of the season against Cincinnati, just to start getting it in opponents' minds? Like we've got this Swiss Army knife over here. You don't have any idea what he might do at any time. Sure, we're going to show you some of the plays we'll run with him, but he still might be a decoy when he's on the field. Do you expect to see this immediately once the season begins?
I would hope so. I don't know that it'll be like opening drive type of stuff, but even if your entire objective is to be able to throw them out there and force the defense into a panic or get them to call a timeout or something, that has value in it. And it's not just that he's going to be used as a decoy or something like that, or we could see these formations where he's taking the snap under center and they have KJ lined up on the outside. That wouldn't be a surprise to see that play out at all. But I think that there needs to be a lot shown with him, because preparing for that is different, right? Like, all the different ways in which you have to prepare for this Arkansas backfield is that's got to be frustrating for a defensive coordinator, right? I mean, all the different things that they can throw at you with Dominique Johnson kind of operating as more of this power back, and we know that A.J. Green has this electric speed, Rocket Sanders a little bit of both, and then KJ's got that power. Like, preparing for all these different things, then you're like, oh, and they've also got this guy Malik Hornby who could just get carries as a receiver, as a running back, as a quarterback, whatever, and we got to prepare for that too. This guy that they call Tyreek Hill, that just seems terrible to have to deal with. And I think Kendall Briles would be more than willing to show a variety of looks for Malik early on in the season.
Mm-hmm. Now, Connor, this happened last week, but we obviously happened Wednesday night and into Thursdays, and we talked to you on Monday. So I do want to get your opinion about Jimbo versus Saban, and even if you have a comment about the side story of Dion, which isn't the main story. I mean, it's all about Jimbo and Saban. What were your thoughts on the initial remarks by Saban and then Jimbo's surprise press conference to say despicable 30,000 times?
Yeah, look, I didn't necessarily think it was one of those cases where everything that came out of Nick Saban's mouth or everything that came out of Jimbo Fisher's mouth was factually correct. It was surprising to see Saban run with rumors like that in that setting and be so loose trying to make his argument. His argument was for actually the same thing that Jimbo Fisher is advocating for, which is federal regulation with NIL. Having some sort of regulation, maybe it's at the federal level, maybe it's at the NCAA level, but having some sort of actual guidelines with enforcement and things that they can take moving forward, so that we can't just call people out for it and then say, oh, well, I didn't say you were cheating. They want regulation. Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing is seeing Saban kind of have to back off of what he says for singling out Texas A&M. I mean, we saw the apology after Jimbo gets up to the podium. He looks like he's done 90 minutes on the elliptical, just out of breath and ready to go. I mean, his guns were blazing. He came into that thing hot. You can only imagine what he was saying, without a microphone in front of him. And I thought, if you're an A&M fan, that's exactly what you want to see out of Jimbo Fisher. It's still odd that we're living in this world where NIL is in its infancy and we are still so unsure of how to talk about it, and why it's considered so taboo for these coaches to say, yeah, a player came to my school because of NIL. They're still not sure how to do that because it goes against everything they've built themselves up to be from a recruiting standpoint. So there are a lot of different things involved with this and a lot of different layers, and then the Dion layer, which I thought that was just Saban being way too loose. 5 days earlier, he's talking about the parity in college football, and then he's saying one of the big issues in college football is that Jackson State and HBCU is coming out, and he has no facts whatsoever to prove that Travis Hunter got $1 million to go there. He's coming out and saying that. To me, that's he was all over the place with some of this stuff, and I thought that was the most surprising thing.
And with that, NIL and the transfer portal, it's been rumored that it's been the reason why so many guys in college basketball have decided to hang up the whistle. It's been rumored that's why Coach K, Roy, and Jay Wright all hung it up, because they just didn't want to have to deal with this. Is it starting to look that the pressure of portal, of NIL, of where college football is heading, is it starting to get to Nick Saban?
I think there are elements that he doesn't really want this to be the future in that sort of way. I mean, Saban is the person who recruited the number one class in the country 8 of 10 seasons during the 2010s. This is somebody who has dominated the sport in a way that we've never seen anybody, especially in the modern era. And so for him to all of a sudden have this reality in which a 17, again, this is through his eyes, where a 17-year-old kid can come into his office and, he can make his usual pitch. He can talk about the $1 billion of earnings that his players have had at the NFL level since 2010. And he could say all these different things, point to all these championship rings. And then the 17-year-old kid says, well, A&M's offering me this, so I'm just going to go there. Like, that's a tough pill in his eyes. Again, this is according to him, that he has to swallow. So I think he is at least frustrated with the way that things are trending, but at the same time, nobody has been better at adapting or dying than Nick Saban. And if he wants to adapt in this world and not die, he'll adapt. But there is probably a world in which Nick Saban could walk off with a national championship this year and just ride off into the sunset and say, you know what, maybe this isn't for me anymore. I still think that he's probably going to be able to find a way, because that's just what Nick Saban has always done. But this does at least feel different than adjusting to the hurry-up offense or whatnot. This is a more systemic issue.
So much of what Coach Saban was talking about in that 7-minute, and it wasn't a rant. It was just an answer. I saw people use the word rant, and I'm like, this was actually a pretty pretty calm. Ranting, to me, you get out of control. We've seen Nick Saban rant before on television. That was not a rant. It felt almost like I wanted to look back and see how many years in the last, 10, 11 years has Alabama, A, not won the national title, B, not signed the top class in the country in the same year. Probably hasn't happened very often. And I don't know if this has much to do with it or not. It also felt like a coach that, look, there aren't guidelines from the NCAA, and it's too difficult to keep up on all the state laws and what works in what state and what doesn't work in other states. It felt like a coach that, without these guidelines, said, all right, well, we're going to have a collective. We're going to do it this way. You had another coach with a different setup that did it a totally different way, might have taken advantage of the fact that there were no guidelines or rules set forth, and he signed a better class. and Nick Saban's like, well, all right, I did it the right way. The right way was his way. Jimbo Fisher did a different way, signed a better class. It felt like lashing out from that.
No, let's also remember, too, I mean, the NCAA has rules, but there's no point in having rules if you're not willing to enforce them. I mean, that's part of the problem here, and that's why Nick Saban is frustrated. You bring up the point about not having a number one class, not winning a national championship. Let's also not forget that this past year, that came at the hands of two of his former assistants. Mm-hmm. Okay, he had been undefeated against his former assistants, and then Jimbo upsets him as a 3-score dog. First time that he had lost to a team outside of the top 15 in the AP poll in over a decade. I mean, think about that. So that happens in the regular season. Then he loses to Kirby in a national championship, and then, oh, by the way, he doesn't sign the number one class. I think that there are things that Saban looks at this past year that really eat at him, because he's checking at least one of those boxes on an annual basis. And for him to come away with what is essentially empty in the eyes of Nick Saban, I think that's a tough pill to have to swallow. And now he feels like, okay, if I'm working against this in this new era of NIL, where NIL can just be anything, and he feels like I don't really want to construct my roster that way. I'd rather construct it with this and have incentives more so when players get here, then that's a different story. Obviously, nobody wants to hear about parity and about an even playing field from a guy who dominated the sport the way that Nick Saban did. But, yeah, there are a lot of different things going on, and a lot of things that I think fed into this 7-minute response that he gave about the bigger issue of NIL.
And, Connor, does this kind of get at least publicly squashed and fixed in Destin next week, or is this bad blood and this storyline, is it going to follow all the way to SEC Media Days? And if it goes that far, is it still out there come October 10th?
Yeah, I mean, how could it not be? Even if they have some sort of a joint statement saying, hey, we talked, whatever, we're moving on, Jimbo's not forgetting that. And there's no way that Jimbo is just going to let that slide and let bygones be bygones. Saban apparently tried to call him, and Jimbo's like, yeah, I didn't answer. We're done with that. That's different. And I saw the tweet thread that Ryan Fowler had about how Jimbo waited after Saban won a national championship, and he waited an hour, and they've always gotten along, and he didn't really have these pent up things about him. But I think it's just different when you attack your program. I think that it takes a relationship to a different place. It's almost like, if you have a relationship with a friend and then they kind of cross the line with something they're saying about your family or something, that's the way that Jimbo came across with this response that he had, where he's not letting anything, he's not letting any stone go unturned. He's not worried about being politically correct or anything like that. He's not worried about what that halftime or what that midfield handshake is going to look like. So that feeds into all this, and I think that's why this is going to continue. When those two teams meet, man, it's going to be must-see TV, and quite frankly, I think the SEC kind of needs this.
Last thing here, and we'll keep it quick, Connor. I'm really bummed out that Indiana and Iowa aren't on the football schedule for this next year, because I really would like to give those two football teams a chance to outscore the baseball teams from last weekend. Did you see that? Iowa beat Indiana 30-14 in a baseball game. That's more points than those teams scored in football when they met in week 1 last year.
Yeah, my wife told me the other day, she's like, did you see Indiana and Iowa played in a 30-16 game? I'm like, baseball? I was like, what are we talking about here? I was trying to think of all the different sports. Like, that would have made more sense in lacrosse, I think, than baseball. It wasn't able to catch that. Look, I've already accepted that in the I'm a fair weather Indiana baseball fan. My Indiana baseball fandom peaked when I got to watch that team with Kyle Schwarber play in the College World Series in Omaha, which was almost 10 years ago. It's kind of crazy to think about. But look, hey, if they can get out there and start scoring some points for the Indiana football team, I think it would be a pleasant sight after the way that things went last year and how poor their offensive prospects look.
Connor, we're going to run. Appreciate you, man. Thanks as always.
Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including updated odds on the NBA playoffs, fights, and even next season's futures. And don't forget that the MLB is back as well. Who are you picking to win the World Series? BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.